The call came just after lunch. I was in my office, sorting through a deposition draft, when my phone lit up with the school's number. I answered out of habit, expecting maybe a forgotten lunchbox or a mild headache. But the nurse's voice was low and tense. "Ms. Walsh, Lily's here with me. She's upset and refusing to return to class." I was in my car within 5 minutes. By the time I got to the school, Lily was curled into herself in the nurse's office, her backpack clutched tight like armor. Her eyes were red, jaw clenched the way it gets when she's trying not to cry in front of adults. "She made me read my essay," Lily whispered, not lifting her head. "In front of the whole class." "Who did?" "Ms. Peterson. She said everyone needed to hear a real example of poor structure. Then when I finished, she said it was clearly written by a child with no understanding of literature, and that I shouldn't waste everyone's time." I knelt beside her. "Sweetheart." She laughed, Lily said, barely audible. Everyone was quiet, and she laughed. I closed my eyes. Not because I was overwhelmed, but because I was trying to control what came next. Rage doesn't serve a child already humiliated. Steadiness does. Lily has dyslexia. Diagnosed last year, after years of struggling silently and being labeled as slow. That essay, the one Ms. Peterson tore apart, was something we'd spent days on. She'd poured herself into it, read it aloud to me 3 times, fixed every sentence with care. "She does it to other kids too," Lily added. "Jamie. He has a stutter. And Zoe, the girl from Mexico." I didn't say anything then. I just took her hand and walked her out of the building. But something inside me had already shifted. Because Ms. Peterson hadn't just humiliated my daughter. She'd made the mistake of doing it to the child of a mother who knows exactly how the law works. I didn't always know how to fight. I learned. I grew up in a house where silence was currency. Where if something felt wrong, you kept it to yourself and waited for it to pass. My father believed in toughening up, my mother in keeping the peace. By the time I turned 18, I knew 2 things for certain: I wanted a different life, and I would never let anyone else write my story for me. Law school taught me how to speak. Motherhood taught me why. When Lily was born, I wasn't planning on doing it alone. Her father and I had dreams: a little house with mismatched furniture, a tiny nursery we painted ourselves. But life isn't always polite with its timing. He passed away from a sudden heart condition when Lily was just 3, and from that moment on, it was just the 2 of us. Lily has always been bright. She could memorize song lyrics after one listen, build entire worlds out of Lego bricks, notice the tiniest detail in a painting. But reading? Reading was a war. Letters flipped on her. Words disappeared mid-sentence. I remember the night in 2nd grade when she tore up her worksheet and whispered, "I think my brain is broken." It took years to find the right specialist. To get the testing done. To explain to teachers why a perfectly articulate child froze when asked to read aloud. Eventually, we had a diagnosis: dyslexia, and with it, a small team of people who finally saw her the way I always had. But not everyone cared to understand. We fought for accommodations. Extra time. Audiobooks. Alternative assignments. It wasn't about making it easier, it was about giving her the same chance. So when Lily finally volunteered to write a full essay, and then edit it, and then print it without asking me to check every word, I was floored. We read it together. She was nervous, sure, but proud. And I remember thinking, she's turning a corner. Until yesterday. Until a teacher used that essay, the one she built with trembling hands and quiet bravery, as a public example of failure. Until she reduced all Lily's effort to a punchline. And now my daughter, who once whispered her words like they might fall apart, sat in the nurse's office and told me she never wanted to write again. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I took notes. I wrote down everything Lily told me, word for word. Because if Ms. Peterson wanted to weaponize words, she had just picked a fight with someone who uses them for a living. That night, after Lily fell asleep, Curled up in the old quilt my mother made, her face still puffy from crying, I opened my laptop and began sending emails. Not angry rants. Not threats. Questions. To the mothers I knew from PTA meetings. To the father who ran the fundraiser booth. To the parents whose children Lily had mentioned in passing. I kept the tone neutral, but honest. Has your child ever had a negative classroom experience with Ms. Peterson that made them feel ashamed, targeted, or dismissed, especially around reading or public speaking? The replies came fast. And they did not come lightly. One mother wrote, "My son stutters. Ms. Peterson regularly interrupts him and tells him to breathe properly or don't speak at all." Another, "My daughter, who transferred from Mexico last semester, has been mocked for her accent in front of the class." I reported it. Principal Garrett said Ms. Peterson was just enforcing high standards. Someone else sent a screen capture of a rejected complaint. The subject line read, "Concern about classroom environment." The reply? "Thank you for your concern. Ms. Peterson has a long record of academic excellence. Students often need time to adjust to her teaching style." Adjusted? They were being humiliated. Dismissed. Punished for learning differently. By the next morning, I had 16 parent responses. 12 of them included specific incidents. 7 had previously submitted complaints. All of them had been ignored. Patterns. Documented. Dismissed. I shifted into attorney mode. Pulled up the Colorado Department of Education's guidance on student accommodations. Reviewed the district's own policies on inclusive teaching. Found the clause buried deep in the handbook about equal access to instruction for neurodivergent and ESL students. It wasn't just cruel what Ms. Peterson was doing. It was illegal. Then I started tracing her history. 2 school transfers in 5 years. Both tied to personnel realignment with no further explanation. I called a contact in a nearby district. One of the transfers had happened there. She remembered Peterson. Not fondly. She left after an internal review. Parents were unhappy. The district made it quiet. Of course they did. Keep it quiet. Protect the school. Protect the reputation. Let the students carry the shame. But I wouldn't let that happen here. Not to Lily. Not to Jamie. Not to Zoe. Not to any of the kids already learning how to shrink themselves because a teacher decided they weren't enough. I met with 3 other parents that weekend in my dining room. We brought documents. Emails. Notes our kids had come home with. A dad played a recording of his son crying in the car after being forced to read aloud with a stutter. "I thought he was exaggerating," the dad said. "Now I feel like I failed him." "You didn't fail him," I said, quietly. "The system did." We built a shared folder online. Began logging everything. And then one of the older students, a brave girl named Jordan, sent me a file. A recording. Taken during class. With Peterson's voice loud and clear. "Honestly, if English isn't your strength, maybe this school isn't the right fit for you." And laughter. From students too scared not to join in. I closed my eyes, hands tight around my coffee mug. I wasn't just going to submit a complaint. I was going to submit a case file. With evidence. With law. With leverage. Because Ms. Peterson had gotten away with it for too long. And she had just underestimated the wrong mother. I didn't tell Lily what I was doing, not yet. She was still fragile, still flinching when the subject of school came up. Her confidence was like tissue paper after rain, thin, delicate, ready to tear. She needed time. Space. Safety. And I needed to make sure that the next time we talked about Ms. Peterson, it would be with certainty. With action. With something more than empty reassurance. So while Lily worked through her days quietly, keeping her head down in class and coming straight home afterward, I worked in silence. At night. On weekends. Between casework. I compiled a dossier. Every email, every recording, every testimonial was sorted, time-stamped, and indexed. I built a timeline, documented every parent complaint, every non-response from Principal Garrett, every incident that showed a pattern of discrimination against students with learning differences or language barriers. Then I layered in the law. Federal protections under the Americans with Disabilities Act. Title II violations. State-level policy on equitable instruction. District-specific guidelines on how to handle accommodation plans and reported educator misconduct. Ms. Peterson hadn't just broken classroom trust. She had violated civil protections. And the administration hadn't just failed to intervene. They had knowingly ignored red flags. I wrote the summary as if preparing for trial. Not because I wanted to file a lawsuit, but because I wanted them to know I could. That I was prepared. That I had precedent, statute, and case history to back me. But the most important piece wasn't legal. It was emotional. That final recording. Jordan's clip. The one where Ms. Peterson mocked Zoe's accent and dismissed her in front of the entire class. It was clear. Cruel. And impossible to defend. I saved it onto a USB drive. Then I printed the list of families I was now representing. 12 names. 12 children. 12 stories they could no longer ignore. When I was done, I closed the folder, labeled it with a black marker, District 4, Internal Evidence, Peterson Conduct. And I made an appointment with Principal Garrett. The receptionist asked for the nature of my meeting. I told her calmly. It's about a pattern of discrimination and classroom abuse. I'll be bringing documentation. Her silence told me she understood. This wasn't a parent complaint. This was something else entirely. And when I walked into that office 2 days later, I wasn't there just as Lily's mother. I was walking in as the attorney for every child Ms. Peterson had tried to silence. I arrived at the school 15 minutes early. Not because I was nervous, because I was ready. I'd reviewed my notes 3 times that morning, checked the USB for integrity, printed a second copy of the legal summary in case Garrett asked to keep one. This wasn't about emotion anymore. I'd burned through all of that already, in silence, in private. This was about presentation. Precision. Pressure applied in exactly the right place. When I stepped into the main office, the receptionist gave me a tight smile and gestured toward the conference room. He's waiting. I nodded. Thank you. Principal Garrett sat at the end of a long table, framed by windows overlooking the playground. He wore his usual half-smile, the one I'd seen during PTA meetings and student exhibitions. The smile that said I'm listening, even when he wasn't. That mask of calm diplomacy school leaders wear when parents come in upset. Samantha, he said smoothly, standing up to shake my hand. Thanks for coming in. I hope Lily's doing better. She's stable, I replied, taking my seat and placing the USB drive between us. But that's not why I'm here. He raised an eyebrow, but didn't reach for the device. I'm here representing 12 families in your school community whose children have been consistently mistreated by Ms. Peterson over the last several months. In violation of district policy, state education law, and federal protections under the ADA. He blinked. The smile faltered. I continued. On that drive is a compilation of first-hand accounts, parent emails, audio recordings from inside Ms. Peterson's classroom, and a full legal analysis of how your administration has failed to respond to escalating, documented concerns. He reached for the drive now, slower this time. This seems more formal than I expected, he said, voice cautious. I leaned in slightly, not to intimidate, but to eliminate room for dismissal. I want to be very clear, I said. I'm not here to argue. I'm not here to negotiate. I'm here to deliver the outline of consequences your district will face if you continue to ignore the systemic abuse happening under your roof. He opened his mouth. I held up a hand. The time for excuses has passed. Your response to multiple parent complaints has been to defend a teacher who is actively harming vulnerable students, some with documented learning disabilities, others learning English for the first time. These aren't isolated incidents. This is a pattern. And if you don't act immediately, we will. Garrett looked stunned, more than I expected. Not combative, not defensive. Just, unprepared. I didn't realize it had reached this level, he said. It has, I said. And I gave you every opportunity to realize it before today. He was quiet for a long time. What do you want? He finally asked. I slid a second document across the table, clearly labeled. Proposed actions to remedy systemic discrimination. It included immediate administrative leave for Ms. Peterson pending investigation. Independent classroom observation by a third-party educator. Mandatory sensitivity and ADA compliance training for all instructional staff. A revised, enforceable complaint response protocol. And a public apology, delivered in writing, to the affected families. Garrett read in silence. When he looked up, the half-smile was gone. I'll need to discuss this with the district superintendent. You do that, I said. But understand, this is not a request. It's a courtesy. I stood, gathered my bag, and looked him in the eye one last time. If you fail these kids again, next time it won't be a meeting. It'll be litigation. Then I turned and walked out. Not angry. Not triumphant. Just certain. Because justice isn't loud. It's deliberate. And that morning, I made sure he finally heard us. 2 weeks later, the letter went out to every parent in the school district. Subject: administrative action and commitment to student support. Beneath the polished language and district seal, the message was clear: Ms. Peterson had been placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. There would be no return date given until the process had concluded. All instructional staff would undergo mandatory sensitivity training within the month, and a new protocol for reporting classroom concerns had been adopted, one that ensured direct district oversight. The message was public. But the shift behind the scenes was louder. Parents who'd been ignored were suddenly getting phone calls, emails, apologies, offers for meetings. Accommodations that had been denied for months were being approved in days. The school, once so eager to defend its standards, had discovered the weight of accountability, and it was scrambling to keep up. I didn't gloat. I didn't post about it. I didn't even tell most of the other parents what happened behind that closed office door. Because this was never about my pride. It was about Lily's voice, and the voices of every child who'd been taught that theirs didn't matter. The morning the letter went out, Lily came downstairs in her pajamas, holding her phone. Mom, she said cautiously, everyone's talking about Ms. Peterson. Is it true? I sat her down. Told her everything. Not every legal term or technical clause, just the truth. Yes. It's true. She's not teaching anymore. And the school's finally listening. Lily stared at me. Because of me? I shook my head. Because of what she did. But you were the reason I couldn't stay quiet anymore. She looked away for a moment. Then back at me, her eyes clearer than they'd been in weeks. She always made me feel like my best wasn't good enough. And now, I said softly, you'll never have to hear that from her again. That Friday, I picked her up from school and took her to the same ice cream shop we used to visit when she was little, back when reading a menu was an ordeal and she used to order by pointing at the pictures. She read the specials out loud without hesitation. When the server left, she looked at me and asked, "Do you think she'll ever teach again?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "That's up to the district." "But she'll never do that to another kid?" "Not if I can help it." Lily didn't smile. But she didn't flinch either. She just nodded, stirred her ice cream, and said, "Good." And in that moment, I realized the fear had finally left her voice. Not because she'd won. Because she'd been heard. And that made all the difference. It's been 4 months since that meeting in the principal's office. 4 months since I walked in as one woman, and walked out carrying the voices of 12 families. Ms. Peterson never returned to the classroom. The district never publicly admitted wrongdoing. They never do. But behind the scenes, things changed. A new complaint protocol was implemented. Staff now receive quarterly training on inclusive education and student protections. And in Lily's school, the air feels a little lighter. The fear is gone. Not just from her, but from the other kids too. Jamie now speaks during presentations, still with pauses, but without apology. Zoe reads aloud in class, her accent soft but steady, and her classmates now listen instead of giggle. It's not perfect. But it's better. And better is what we were fighting for. Lily submitted an essay last week that she wrote entirely on her own. When I asked if she wanted help reviewing it, she said, "No thanks, I've got it." She still makes mistakes. Still hesitates when spelling unfamiliar words. But she doesn't hide her writing anymore. She owns it. That's more than I ever could have asked for. Sometimes, I think about what would have happened if I hadn't picked up that phone. If I'd chalked it up to another strict teacher. If I'd asked Lily to toughen up, to not take it personally. I think about the version of myself that might have said nothing, and the kids who would have stayed quiet because they thought no one would believe them. But I didn't stay quiet. Because I remembered something no one taught me in law school, but motherhood made sure I understood. The first time your child's voice is ignored, it's your voice they borrow. The second time, if they've seen you stand up, they'll use their own. So I stood up. Not with anger. Not with noise. But with records. With law. With quiet, unstoppable certainty. Lily asked me once if it was hard, being the person who speaks up when others stay silent. I told her the truth. Yes. It is. But it's harder to live with silence that costs someone else their dignity. She didn't answer right away. She just reached over, took my hand, and said, "Next time, if someone needs help, I'll speak too." And that's how I knew the cycle had shifted. Not just for her, but for every child who now believes they're worth defending. Because standing up for one voice can make room for all the ones who never knew they could. And that's how I learned that living well is the best revenge. Did this story hit home? Tell me what you would have done in the comments. Smash that like, subscribe to EN True Tales for a new true revenge story every day. And share this with a friend who loves karma.